Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions, brought to you by AmericanManganeseInc.com. Here is Phil Mackesy.
Harvey Oberfeld is an investigative journalist. He retired a while back after an almost 40-year career as a print and TV reporter, but he keeps it real on his blog. You can catch the latest online at harveyoberfeld.ca. That's HarveyOberfeld.ca. Write that down and check it out. It's a great blog, well worth visiting. Hey, Harvey, welcome to This Week in Money.
Good to be here.
First of all, I want to thank you for all those great years on BCTV, along with Cameron Bell and Keith Bradbury. You guys set the standard for a lot of TV news operations.
Well, we did, and the way they did it, I mean, the secret, it's not a great secret anymore. What the BCTV did when they wanted to take on the CBC, because at one point BCTV was, I think, second or third in the ratings, they went out and hired newspaper reporters, real journalists. And, I mean, we had the homeliest-looking group of people on here, but we were all sort of pretty good reporters, senior reporters, and they taught us how to do TV. And I guess it worked because they went up to number one in the ratings, and at one point we're ahead, like, I think 5 or 6 times their nearest competitor.
I think at one time the BCTV News was the most watched newscast in North America. Am I right there?
on a ratings basis and with the market, it was the most watched in North America. And a lot of other places learned from BCTV, like, the studio being right in the newsroom with the monitors in the back. That came from BCTV, and then also the type of reporting we did. Which I brought to Parliament Hill, and people were quite shocked because our attitude was, what does it mean to the average person? Don't give me this stuff like there's some 455-page report listing all kinds of stuff that doesn't mean anything to the average person. Give us the real news. What are you going to do that's going to affect the price of beer or the price of our taxes or anything that really counts? And we used to ask questions that way, and it certainly caught on, not only in BC, but the odd time some of my stories would be used back east because the public liked them. They sort of all of a sudden had somebody who was really interested in what the people thought and what the people wanted, not just what the politicians and the Parliament Hill Press Gallery were interested in.
Harvey, the obvious question I have to ask at this point is, what the hell happened? TV news seems a whole lot less newsier these days.
I've sort of studied that, and I've written about it, and I'm really persona non grata with a lot of the media now. I got dumped from the Webster Awards. I was a judge there for 2 years afterwards, but I started to do the thing you're not supposed to do. I looked at the media, and I criticized the media, so all of a sudden I was gone from there. But what happened with the media was they started to do more with less. They started cutting back the staff, and basically they started going for cheap is cheaper. So they started using like lots of file footage, and whenever they could, instead of going out and getting fresh footage, and they even stopped putting the word file footage on top of the footage in many cases. They also hired cheaper. When you hire a senior reporter from the Vancouver Sun or senior print people, they cost money. Well, you can hire 2 or 3 people out of journalism school who are cheaper to work with. They're certainly more enthusiastic and don't complain as much as the old farts. So that's what the ownership did. They just went for people that are cheaper, more they didn't have the experience. They might not have had the knowledge. So then what you do when you have people like that, well, where are you going to send them? You can't really send them into deep topics like political backgrounders and all that kind of stuff, or something that requires investigations. So you start covering fires, and you start covering accidents, and you start covering press conferences, and all this stuff that is just given to you on a platter each day. Every march, every run, every sort of thing for charity. I mean, all this kind of stuff. So you water down the product and you produce it much more cheaply at the same time that the people that own these stations are making money hand over fist. Now,
I understand that TV news, of course, is a business, always has been a business, but what about the young farts? Are they asking the same kind of questions that the old farts did?
No, they don't know. They don't even know. I mean, there's a famous story when Pierre Trudeau's son got killed up in the mountains. One station here didn't catch on to it. It was just another death in the mountains, because the person handling the desk that time, I think it was a weekend, was so junior and was not born in Canada and had no idea who this person even was, just that some guy named, Michel Trudeau had been killed, and they were a day behind. They hadn't even know who they were. You ask a lot of young reporters today about W.A.C. Bennett, or ask about Bill Bennett and the Record and how they carried out campaigns. They wouldn't even know who they are, let alone Bill Vander Zalm and Clark and all the intricacies of how they ran office. No, it's just there's just a lot of inexperience out there. So what do you do with people like that? Well, you send them to accidents. You send them to traffic problems. You send them, building a new bridge. They can handle that.
Features.
They can handle fires. They can chase ambulances. But they're not going to do a deep investigative stuff, and they're not, even the ones who have some semblance of experience, often they don't get the time they need to go and do the in-depth investigations, because what they want is in by 9, out by 5, and that kind of stuff shows on the programming. Occasionally there are exceptions, occasionally I've seen some of the stations put people into doing investigative stuff, and it's pretty good when they get the senior people they do have left doing it. Some of it's pretty good, but there's not enough of them doing it, and those who do it aren't given enough time or don't do it often enough.
We're talking to Harvey Oberfeld here on This Week in Money. His blog is online at harveyoberfeld.ca. And one of the big things that's changed, obviously, Harvey, since the glory days of BCTV, the Internet. How is TV news responding to the Internet and to blogs like yours?
Well, I think, frankly, from blogs like mine, they try to ignore it. I mean, they don't like what they see, because, if anybody goes on my blog and just clicks on the media section, you'll see why. They really don't like, they love criticizing other people, but they sure don't like it when you turn the spotlight back on their declining quality or some of the mistakes they make or things like that. So they try to ignore the Internet. Now, they are making greater use of the Internet and trying to, you can go on their own websites and get updates in the news, and they've gone to that and done that in a big way. And I think a lot of the stuff they now get, they've gone very, very high-tech computerized inside the newsrooms. But part of that's one of the reasons for that is they want to try to eliminate as many human bodies as possible. So it's all becoming very, very computerized, very hands-on. You get the new, what they call the reporter, cameraman, producer. Do everything, and of course sometimes it shows.
But we're still getting a lot of style over substance from these people.
Well, that's the flash. Quite often we used to do stories 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and we were told if it sustains, you can go that long. People used to be glued to the sets. I remember the old days when if you weren't watching the news hour at 6 o'clock, the next day at work, you were out of the loop. You didn't know what was really going on. Everybody watched the news hour just to make sure they were in the loop. Well, you don't have to now most of the time. If you want to see quite often what's on the news hour, read the morning newspaper, or just, you can tune in, but if you miss it, you won't be out of the loop the next day at work. And the stories are much shorter. Now they want you to get it all done in 2 minutes or so, or sometimes 1:45 or 2.5, but you don't really go in depth. Get some visuals, a couple of talking heads, maybe a graphic, and this is at all stations, and then you're done. And one of the things that accomplishes is it certainly hides the inexperience of those doing the reporting. And the other thing is, watch the writing. Watch the way they word things. I used to write things. That's the thing, when you hire print reporters, you're hiring people that have writing skills. These days, they just look at it and they just, whatever they cover, it's so blandly written. It's almost, I think the people who have a background in real journalism, they must cringe when they see some of the things, the way it's written, the way some of these young reporters put things on air. But they work cheaply, they work quickly, and they don't complain. Is
there any hope, Harvey, for hard news in TV these days?
I always, hope springs eternal, and I like to think, the ratings are not doing as well as they would like, and people, they say, they say, it's being fractured because there's so many other options. Well, eventually, at some point, you have to look at what you're putting on air. You have to look at what you're producing. You have to stop being, doing puff pieces and all kinds of promo pieces. And I think if you start offering people really quality journalism, quality stories that somebody will bring up at work the next day, hey, did you see what was on? People will start tuning in, but you can't give people watered-down soup and then have them come out of the restaurant and say, gee, that was delicious. But I'm just hoping at some point they will realize the future of journalism, the future of viewership, lies with producing quality stuff. And whenever you look at news magazines that produce quality stuff, the viewers are there, but you can't give them, a crud, of here we are at an accident scene, or here we are at some sort of anything that's instant on a platter, and expect people to rush home and tune that in.
When you look at the people who used to cringe at news reports, and those would be politicians, they got to be cheering the news trend today, where there's much less heat on them.
A lot of people celebrated my departure more than I did. Where's the tough questionings? Where's the chasing down the hall? I had a reputation for chasing people down the hall and demanding answers, and now it's hard enough to get them to leave behind their desk and go out and do anything. And when they go out, they just go and they ask them, whatever the question du jour is at a minister or whatever at a press conference, and they go home, and very few of them will ask the tough questions, because in addition to the inexperience when it comes to covering politics, too many of them have been there too long. And when you're there too long covering too many people, you get friendly with them, and when that's worse than death when a reporter who's covering politics becomes friendly with the people he covers. You really can't have that. My position has always been you should rotate political reporters every 6 or 7 years at most, so you get new blood, you get people that aren't friendly with the people they're covering. And a lot of people don't know this, but when I pulled the plug on myself in Ottawa after 8 years, that was my decision. I just felt that it was time to get home to Vancouver and get some new blood in there. And they were quite shocked when I announced that I was pulling the plug. But I'd been sent for 2 years, and I stayed 8, and I decided that I was getting stale. I just didn't feel it was exciting enough to go up to the Hill every day, and I just decided that wasn't good for me, and it wasn't good for journalism. So I just said I'm coming home, and they couldn't stop it because that was part of the agreement. But that was my decision, and I think they should do that on every beat, every political beat. After 7 or 8 years, pull the plug and put somebody in there that has some excitement and some interest in really going after the people they're covering.
Now, Harvey, you might be semi-retired, but you're not out of the news entirely. Where do you go for your news? Where do you look when you're looking for news stories?
Well, I basically read the newspapers. I listen to the radio. I go online. I read online. I watch international newscasts. I do watch the local news occasionally, but I'm surprised at myself that I don't watch it that often. I'll turn it on and I'll watch quite often the first 15, 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden I find myself going over to Piers Morgan or something like that, or I just find myself clicking the dial because it's not much there to sustain me. And I think I'm a regular viewer, so I try to watch the top package, flipping back and forth. So of all the stations, CBC, CTV, BCTV Global, and I flip back and forth, but I get a lot of my information now from newspapers and from watching international news and also online.
Harvey Oberfeld from HarveyOberfeld.ca, our guest here on This Week in Money. And in the news this week, Harvey, a minority PQ government in Quebec, currency and stock markets shrugged. So did most people outside the province. But you're saying on your blog, wait a minute, un moment s'il vous plaît, not so fast here. What's really going on in Quebec?
Well, exactly, because I'm from Quebec and I have my degree in political science from University in Quebec, Concordia. I understand the separatists. I understand what they have planned. And a lot of us are breathing a sigh of relief outside of Quebec because they just got a minority government. Don't you believe that? They know they just lost the last referendum by a whisker, and they are going to work very assiduously to change the dynamic. And the way they're going to do that, as I wrote on my blog, first of all, they're going to try to pick a fight with Ottawa, several fights. And eventually Ottawa will say no to something, and then they'll declare, oh, this is the biggest insult to Quebec. This is where Quebec is being downtrodden. This is where we're being mistreated. And what the PQ will do is they'll put even the other party that's going to support them as a minority government, the CAQ, they'll put them in a position, because they're quite nationalistic. Well, you have to support Quebec. You can't support Ottawa. So they will create an issue. Now, the problem is that for them, the 28% of the population want a referendum, the rest don't want it. But all they really have to do is win over another 23% of the vote to win the next referendum. So what they will do is they will, number one, create an issue with Ottawa. Number two, they're going to try to get more Anglos and allophones to leave. 600,000 left before, and when they played around with the referendums and that didn't quite do it because they lost the last referendum by a whisker. So what they're going to do is do everything they can to get more Anglos and more allophones to leave. So they're going to bring in language laws. They're going to make the old ones look gentle. They're going to bring in the what they call the secular charter, which really is an anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim, anti-Sikh, anti-anything other than Catholic legislation, basically getting rid of them in the civil service, making them feel as unwelcome as possible, and with their language laws, they're going to create an atmosphere where more people will just say, I'm getting out of here. And that will help them if they do have a referendum within the next 3 years. I think they might hope for another term because they'll create an issue with Ottawa. Then they'll have what they need, the winning formula, because a lot of the people who would vote in favor of Canada will have left or will not be around anymore.
Harv, you're not pulling any punches here. You're calling this on your blog ethnic cleansing.
Absolutely. It's not violent ethnic cleansing, but it's pretty racist. Can you imagine in any other province of Canada if any government or any opposition party called for legislation that would prohibit Muslims or Sikhs or religious Jews from wearing anything that's religious, like a turban or a skull cap or a handkerchief, a headscarf, but say that wearing a crucifix is all right? Can you imagine what would happen if any other party in Canada ever put that into their platform? I mean, I wonder where Ottawa is on this. And of course, the Charter of Rights may come into play. I mean, but politically, it's just amazing. It's outrageous. And no one is saying anything, but they know exactly what they're trying to do. And they're going to go ahead with that. And they're going to make sure that the English, you wait till you see the language signs, the language laws they're going to bring in. They're going to make it really just make it uncomfortable for anybody who's allophone or anglophone, and maybe a lot of francophones would also say, I've had enough of this, because you and I know the effects on the economy. Who would invest in Quebec right now if you could build the same plant across the border in Ontario? Who would invest there, especially with their talk of raising the capital gains tax, raising income taxes on high-income earners to an outrageous level? They're just basically going to scare away business. They're going to have economic problems, but they don't care about that. They just care about getting the next vote. And to get the next vote, you have to get rid of those people who are federalists, and the language laws will do some of that.
We're already seeing, Harv, some fallout. The main lobby for Quebec business warning companies are holding off investment decisions because of the political uncertainty. That's a no-brainer.
Well, it's a no-brainer, but you see, the thing you have to understand with a lot of the separatists, it's a matter of the heart. These people do not think, look at what happened to their economy last time. You know, a lot of people don't remember at one point Montreal was as big an economic power and population sizes as Toronto. Yeah. But look what's happened. The real benefactor of Quebec separatism has been Toronto, Mississauga, and the rest of Ontario. I mean, the number of plants that left Quebec. I think the Bank of Montreal's corporate headquarters, even de facto, if not de jure, moved itself to Toronto. I mean, what does that tell you? But for the separatists, these are things of national pride. These are things of the heart. They don't care about the economy. And if you look at the map of where they scored well, it's up in the rural areas and the eastern areas up. And they don't. Those people there, it's not like Montreal. This is the hinterland area, and those people really don't. They really don't see the reality of what it will cost them. When I was reporting and I went up there and did stories, I was amazed up in Chicoutimi that people thought that if they separated, the Canadian Air Force Base at Bagotville would remain, and so would the Canada Revenue Agency computer headquarters that's located up there. It would remain in Quebec even if they separated. Okay. I mean, these people, to put it mildly, are idiots.
Delusional.
But they vote with their heart, not with their brains, and that's what the PQ will count on.
Let's take a look at voting with the heart instead of the brains. And one of the hard numbers here, the debt at the end of March, Quebec's gross debt standing at $184 billion. That is higher than in any other province.
Well, and don't forget the what we give them. We give them $8 billion a year in equalization payments. And if you talk to Quebecers, you will be, even Anglophones, you will find that a lot of them believe that Quebec gives more to Ottawa than they get back. And if you say, well, what about the equalization payments? They either go, huh, or they don't. They still don't believe that they're getting their fair share.
Yeah.
They have been totally propagandized by the system and by a media who, if they're Anglophone, are just so politically correct they don't want to insult anybody, and no one reads them in the Francophone community anyway. And if they're Francophone, I believe there's so many of them in there that are supportive of separatism, are so nationalistic themselves, that they're not doing the hard stories they should do to point out to these people what were the terrible costs of last time we played around with this stuff, what are the terrible costs we're going to play around with now. And I think the best thing that could happen now to really make an impression would be if some companies came out and said, well, we're going to be locating in Ontario, or we're putting off plans for investment in Quebec. Maybe they won't say it's for political reasons, but they could say it's because of economic conditions. But the message will go out. And who should lead that should be the NHL. The NHL should announce that any plans for expansion of a new team to Quebec City are on hold, not because of the vote, of course, but because of the economic situation, generally speaking, and make any excuse they want. But the message will go out that there is a price to be paid for playing around with this kind of talk about breaking up the country.
Harvey Oberfeld, our guest here on This Week in Money. He is online at harveyoberfeld.ca. I was going to ask you a question earlier. I wonder why the response from Ottawa at this point has been so muted.
Well, during the election campaign, they didn't want to say anything that, would be seen as interfering in a provincial campaign. But I think now that Harper sees he can build a majority government without seats in Quebec, destroying that old myth that you needed Quebec, I have a feeling that when she starts coming to Ottawa, Marois, with all kinds of demands, he may... He has to look as if he's interested and he'll listen and be cooperative. But I think he'll feel that he has the right to take a hard line, and he would be supported by most Canadians, who I think are really fed up. I don't think you'll see this great march of hundreds of thousands of Canadians there with big flags saying, please, please stay. I don't think you'll see that anymore. So I think the government couldn't really do much during the campaign, but I think at this point they should give them a reality check. And I'm hoping you'll see that from the federal government.
What about a reaction, Harvey, from the NDP? They elected 50 MPs in Quebec in the last election.
You notice how quiet they've been?
Yeah. Can
you imagine where Mulcair and the NDP would be if BC brought in legislation saying Sikhs couldn't wear turbans or Jews couldn't wear skull caps? Can you imagine if they worked for the provincial government? Where's Mulcair? Where's the NDP on this? The NDP has always been sympathetic to the separatists and has never really, in my view, stood up strong enough against them. I think at one point, they're going to have to sort of take a stand, and I bet that's a problem for them because a lot of their support federally comes from the same type of people who would support the PQ provincially. It's a very strange concoction, but that's the way Quebec politics works.
How is this playing in places like the U.S. and overseas? Seems to be a whole lot less interest than here in Canada.
Well, they don't even know. Basically, they really don't follow it. I have relatives in the States who have their own political problems right now dividing them, and I don't think they really care. They don't know much about Canada. I don't think they really care about what goes on here until it actually starts to happen. And even then, but I don't think it plays big in the United States.
Okay, so what's next for Quebec? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think what she'll do is she'll now try to set up her government. She'll try to have get an agenda going, and then look for an issue that she can demand more powers from Ottawa, and look for a few issues, and then sort of set up the bogeyman that Ottawa is not giving us our true powers that we deserve, and all this kind of stuff. That's what she'll do. But first, she's got to set up a government there and start things running internally. But it won't be long before she'll be looking towards Ottawa to create some sort of conflict. What options does Stephen Harper have, and how are they going to play this one? Well, as I say, I think Harper, he can only sit there and let it happen. He has to watch for her to deal her hand. and you know, and when it happens, when she starts putting forward some demands, there may be some things that he's willing to give in on to give the same rights to all the provinces that she may be demanding. But when it comes to things like health care, comes to things like taxation and federal jurisdictions and resources, he's going to have a conflict with her, and that'll be very interesting to see how it plays out, because I don't think Harper is the type of person who will cave into her the way some of the previous prime ministers did.
Great story this week, Harv, on your blog about Quebec. And great comment here. I couldn't pass this up from one of your guys, Diver Darren, comments. He says, if Canada ceased to exist, Canadians could rejoin as they see fit, write a constitution and laws as we deem appropriate, ally with others for our benefit. We could do it peacefully because we're Canadian. That's how we do things. The toughest part will be deciding on a new name.
Well, I think he's a long way from seeing that happen. I don't think. I mean, we're talking way down the road, and I think there's no reason if Quebec left that Canada couldn't remain without her, without that province, and you know, and then charge them all kinds of tariffs to export their goods through our territory, the way they ripped off Newfoundland when they wanted export power through Quebec.
You can keep it real with Harvey Oberfeld on his blog. Catch the latest online at harveyoberfeld.ca. It's well worth a visit. Harvey, it's great to talk to you, and we look forward to talking to you some more.
Okay, Phil.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
John Rubino is co-author of The Collapse of the Dollar and How to Profit from It. Visit John's website, dollarcollapse.com. It's always a good place to be. Your ringside seat for the global financial crisis. John, it's good to have you back on This Week in Money.
Hey, Phil. Good to be back.
It's good to have you after the summer. We're now looking at fall. Remember ECB President Mario Draghi, John? This was the guy who said he'd do whatever it takes to keep the euro going. Today, the ECB announced it'll launch an unlimited bond buying program. What could possibly go wrong here?
Well, the markets definitely liked it. The U.S. stocks are up a couple of hundred points today on the Dow. And on the surface, this sounds like very inflationary, expansionary news that the ECB is going to do whatever it takes and buy unlimited numbers of bonds in order to keep the Eurozone intact. But when you dig a little deeper, one piece of his statement stands out, and that is that they're going to try and sterilize the bond purchases. What that means is that all the money that they put into the system via the purchase of short-term Spanish and Italian and Portuguese bonds, they're going to suck back out by doing something else in some other part of the Eurozone bond market, so that it's not inflationary, so that they aren't increasing the money supply in this process. And what that means is that they're not really doing much of anything. You know, if you sterilize a bond buying policy, and the total amount of money in the system doesn't go up, then you really didn't help that much. What they can do in the short run is keep Italy and Spain from imploding and being forced out of the market because their bond prices spike. But at the same time, they're going to have to be taking money from other countries in the Eurozone in order to pay for this, if they're not creating any new currency and sending it out into the market. And so you get distortions in other parts of the bond market that might offset the improvements in the peripheral country bond markets. And so in the end, you probably didn't accomplish much of anything. This is another one of those buy some time kinds of ideas that get the markets excited in the short run, make it easier to sell paper, and push the problems a little further down the road. And that's probably all it is. So the next stage is that this won't work. And we'll know that sometime in 2013, and they'll have to get rid of that whole sterilization idea and just go for flat-out bond purchases with newly created euros. And so that's the next stage. And you know, this has all been playing out to a very predictable script that was written a long time ago. And the script calls for these guys to be pulled against their better judgment further and further along the road of monetization of debt and just flat out trying to inflate away their currencies. So this is another step, and it's an interim step that will be followed by something much more serious within the next year.
So once the markets get over the short-term couple-of-day euphoria and the finger-pointing starts, who do we blame?
There are so many people.
Yeah.
It goes back to either the creation of the Fed in 1913 in the U.S., if you want to go that far back, or the decision by Richard Nixon in 1971 to take the U.S. completely off any kind of system resembling a gold standard by closing the gold window, and the creation of the Great Society programs in the 1960s. We've made continuous mistakes, all of which pointed towards inflating away the dollar and losing the discipline that gold used to impose on government spending. And all of the people from Richard Nixon on down are partially to blame for it. So you've got Alan Greenspan, Richard Nixon, to an extent Bill Clinton, and the Bushes, and now Barack Obama in charge of, plus all the people who run Congress and the Federal Reserve and the big banks. They've all colluded basically to play a game which was extremely profitable and pleasant for them, which is to not have to prioritize. Just print as much money as you want to do anything you want. Buy any constituency's votes with easy money and new programs for them, whether it's the military-industrial complex or big agriculture or the welfare state or public sector unions or whatever. Buy their votes by printing new money, and then worry about the problems that new money printing will cause in the future. We've been doing this for 30 years, and the effects are starting to become very obvious and very hard to deny, but we're still doing it. We're still playing the same game where we try to push our problems a little further out so we get the benefit in the short run, and maybe we're gone by the time the problems really become intractable. And that's what we're doing. But we're reaching the point where the problems are becoming unavoidable, and that the system is going to break down. And we're seeing that in Europe right now, where the ECB has to do something that it's never done before, that's not in its charter, and that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago, and that is to announce unlimited purchases of peripheral country bonds. Something similar is coming in the U.S., where the next quantitative easing is probably going to be a coordinated global effort with the Fed working with other central banks in order to liquefy the system. And that's something that has been seen only very rarely and on a much smaller scale than what they'll have to do this time. So a lot of big announcements are coming, and all of it is going to be based on desperation, that our problems are just so serious and so overwhelming that we're going to start doing things that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. And the markets might react positively in the short run, but I think eventually people are going to figure out that this is a sign of weakness, that we're in absolute panic mode, and that the whole risk-on trade thing doesn't make sense in a world where the leaders who know what's going on most clearly are this panicked.
We're talking to John Rubino from DollarCollapse.com here on This Week in Money. Hey, a year ago you started writing the Welcome to the Third World series on your blog, and you're now at part 9. It looks pretty open-ended, doesn't it? What inspired you to start writing this series of articles?
Well, I'm not sure what started it, but this turned out to be an article series that really writes itself, because every time you open the paper, you see some new example of how the U.S. is regressing. We used to be a legitimate first world country where the police showed up on time, and libraries were open all the time, and schools were reasonably good in most places, and there were lots of jobs around, and pensions existed for most people, and we were going to be able to retire reasonably early with a reasonable amount of income and live a dignified old age, yada yada. The whole American dream. Now that's being eliminated piece by piece right now, where public sector unions have worked with local governments to get themselves such phenomenally good deals that now their benefits and their wages can't be sustained by tax bases, so we're having massive cutbacks in local government, which is decimating schools and police response times and library hours of operation. So lives are getting harder in most cities right now. At the same time, people who used to have pensions have seen them be eliminated and replaced either with nothing or with defined benefit plans that depend on stock market returns, which have been essentially zero for 10 years. So people who used to think they were going to be able to retire are now stuck on a treadmill where they're going to be working forever. Mm-hmm. And that's especially true of entrepreneurs in the U.S. People who used to think they would build up a business, they worked 12, 14 hours a day for 3 or 4 decades with the expectation that their business would be worth something that they could sell and then have a nice retirement after that. Well, the valuations of small businesses have been falling for several years now, and millions of entrepreneurs out there are basically stuck. They can't sell their businesses for enough to retire, so they've got to work basically forever. There's no end in sight unless the market turns around. And this goes on and on. There are numerous examples of us becoming suddenly a poor country, and it's kind of a quiet depression so far because most people don't think beyond their own situation at the moment. They think they're having a rough patch, but it's going to be temporary, and they'll get back on their feet, and life will go on as normal. But actually, it's millions of Americans suffering the same kind of malaise, where you make one mistake, and the market doesn't let you get back on your feet. And so you're stuck at a lower rung on the economic ladder basically forever. So you might have been upper middle class, you lose one job, and instead of getting another similar job right away, you can't find anything that's comparable, and all of a sudden you're lower middle class, or you're part of the working poor, and you can't put your kids through college, and you can't retire, and you maybe can't even hold on to your house. That's the situation that literally millions of people are facing right now. And the question is, when does it become public rather than a quiet depression?
When do people start complaining?
Now.
When do people start complaining and taking to the streets?
Yeah. Well, it's not clear that we're going to be seeing mass protests over that, but what we will almost certainly see is a change in cultural psychology. In other words, in Elliott wave terms, we'll switch from optimists to pessimists, and that will reflect in the financial markets, where we'll be a lot less likely to want to buy things like equities because we'll be very risk averse.
Yeah.
We won't want to start new businesses, and businesses won't want to hire, and so we'll see the economy tip into Kondratiev winter, which arguably we should have done in 2000 when the tech stock bubble burst. But because we have a printing press, we were able to keep the process going a lot longer. But it was at the cost of $10 trillion new dollars of debt that we took on, which means when this happens, when we tip over into a pessimistic, risk-averse kind of mindset, that the impact will be vastly more serious than it would have been if we'd done so 10 years or 20 years ago. And that's out there. There's no way to know when something like this blows up, but it's very clear that it's going to, and probably in the not-too-distant future.
John Rubino from DollarCollapse.com, our guest here in This Week in Money. We're talking about his excellent series, Welcome to the Third World, that's over on his blog. And one of the most privileged generations in past years, the boomers. We are now firmly in the crosshairs of what's going on.
Yeah, boomers are retiring, or we would like to retire. Yeah. But a lot of people, as I said, who thought that 62, 63, 65, that would be it for them. They'd have enough money put away, and they could kick back and play with their grandkids and do whatever it is they like to do with their free time. They're finding that that's not possible now, that they don't have enough money put away because their stocks didn't go up enough, or they do have quite a bit of money put away, but the interest they can earn on it, which used to be 5 or 6%, maybe in their financial plan, is now 0.05%.
Ouch.
So they're stuck with maybe money in the bank, but no income generated for that. And if they switch into all equities or junk bonds or something like that, they're taking on an unacceptable amount of risk for a retiree. And so that might buy them a few years of income, but at the cost of being halfway wiped out the next time the markets turn down. And so that's a really disturbing situation to find yourself in your 60s, when you maybe don't have the energy or the stamina to work hard for another 10 years or 20 years in order to build up even more capital. So a lot of these people are looking at situations that evoke panic in them because they don't know what the solution is other than just live in poverty. And again, that's the nature of a third world country. When the whole idea of a comfortable retirement is really a very recent first world idea.
Yeah.
It didn't exist for most of the world prior to the 1950s and 60s. Most people just expected to keep on working until they couldn't work anymore and then be taken care of by their families. And then we got the idea that we could build up enough capital individually to basically kick back from 65 to 85 or whatever and live off of our seed corn. Now, we can't do that anymore. And so we're having to come to grips with the fact that something we took for granted, This idea that life had this arc in which you work hard for a while and then you retire and enjoy yourself, doesn't have that arc anymore, that you basically work hard forever. and that's a hard thing to get your mind around if you've been used to thinking of things in a different way. In other words, it's a lot harder to be poor if you were never rich in the first place.
Sure.
But once you've been rich, going back to being poor is catastrophic psychologically, and that's what a lot of Americans are looking at.
What about the children of the boomers? How are they going to adapt to what's coming up?
A lot of people who thought they were going to inherit, first of all, aren't going to inherit nearly as much. And a lot of younger people who expected to go through college reasonably smoothly without accumulating a lot of debt and then to get a good job afterwards, and finding out that that whole process is not true. College tuitions have gone through the roof at the same time that their parents' incomes have been squeezed. So now the folks can't put you through college at $40,000 a year, and you have no choice but if you want that psychology degree, to borrow a ton of money. And so you get out and you find out that the job market isn't anything like you expected. And you owe $50,000 or $75,000 or $100,000, which is literally true in a lot of cases. And so you end up living at your folks' house, working at some kind of a crappy job that didn't require your education to begin with. Barely being able to afford, for instance, health insurance in a car, never being able to buy a house because you've got a ton of student debt, and nobody's going to give you a mortgage because you're already deeply in debt. And so your life is kind of on hold in your 20s. And that's another thing that's hard to get your mind around. If you're a 19-year-old and you expect to have the normal arc where you get a good college degree, get a good job, and then you're off to the races, and that doesn't happen. That's another psychological change. So we're seeing it across the board, and it's going to play out, if history is any guide, in a change in cultural psychology and the cultural mood in the U.S., in which we become Depression-era people. Our parents in the 1950s were extremely conservative in a lot of different ways because they'd been traumatized by what they went through in the 1930s. And so we're creating a generation of people who are going to have that kind of psychology as they go through their lives, where they've seen that everything can be taken away from them. And so for the rest of their lives, they'll be extremely conservative about taking risks because they will know that they can lose. And so, we'll be a very different country for the next 20 or 30 years. But it's also part of the normal cycle. The Kondratiev waves have been going on since there were markets. And so we're somewhere on the downward sloping part of a long cycle, and that's just the way it is. And so we have to come to grips with this as soon as possible, I think.
John Rubino, co-author of The Collapse of the Dollar and How to Profit from It. You can find John online at dollarcollapse.com, and that's where you'll find his excellent Welcome to the Third World series of articles. Please have a look. It's most important that you do that. Hey, John, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks to our guests, Harvey Oberfeld and John Rubino. And thanks to you for listening. I'm Phil Mackesy for AmericanManganeseInc.com. We're back next week with another edition of This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.